flexing his muscles. Is Russia's strongman hoping to hook a permanent hold on power? And what of the critics who say he's just a political cowboy? This is Inside Story. Hello, I'm Sami Zaidan. A blueprint for stability the world should welcome, or just a cynical ploy to cling to power? Vladimir Putin's hints that he may seek to become Russia's prime minister when his presidency ends next March have provoked a mix of reactions. Mr. Putin can't have a third term as president under the current constitution, but he has announced he's entering the race for December's parliamentary elections as leader of the largest party. Well, given Putin's huge popularity among his people, a big majority for the United Russia Party is virtually guaranteed. He could then step into the Prime Minister's shoes, continuing to pull the country's strings from there. Under his presidency, Russia's enjoyed a huge economic boom, in contrast to the chaos that followed Western-backed free market reforms. So would more Putin power be good or bad for the world? Well, before Putin was a Russian leader, he was a Soviet bureaucrat. As only son, Putin was born in St. Petersburg in 1952. He started judo, still one of his favorite hobbies, when he was a teenager. After university, Putin joined the KGB. Well, he spent 17 years working there, much of it in East Germany. But Putin quit his KGB work to enter politics and to try to move foreign companies to post-Soviet Russia. In 1996, Putin headed to Moscow, where he was tapped to head up the domestic side of Russia's security service. 2 years later, he became prime minister under Boris Yeltsin, and in 2000, Russians elected Putin to succeed the man he once served. Well, as President, Putin has tried to shape an image as a man of the people, doing ordinary things like visiting Russians and taking trains. He's also expanded Russia's political reach. He was the country's first president to visit African countries such as Morocco and South Africa. And at home, economic growth has made some Russians prosperous. Domestic polls show that Putin enjoys enormous popularity, with some surveys showing approval ratings of over 70%. Well, joining us are our guests today to discuss the issue. In Moscow, Alexander Pikayev, the deputy head of the Committee for Scientists for Global Security. Also in Moscow, Pavel Felgenhauer, he's the political analyst and columnist at the Novaya Gazeta. And in London, Mark Hollingsworth, a journalist and author. Thank you for joining us. If I could start with Mr. Pikayev. Is this a case of a return of the Tsar? Putin will perhaps stay in power, but just have a new title.
According to opinion of many observers, Mr. Putin used option one for staying in power after his presidency would expire next May. And this is something which is quite challenging for the Russian opposition, which hoped to have a good performance during the Duma elections. Duma is a lower house of Russian parliament. The elections are scheduled for December, but with Mr. Putin as a head of United Russia Party, and given the enormous popularity of Mr. Putin, I think that opposition has very murk chances to be to occupy strong positions in the new parliament, and therefore Mr. Putin party and Mr. Putin himself would remain masters, so to speak, masters of Russia after the parliamentary elections and most likely after the presidential elections, which are scheduled for next March.
Would that be a blow, do you think, to Russian democracy, particularly if he does end up trying to become Russia's prime minister?
Well, I do not think that it is a blow to Russian democracy, because this is, I think that the very good element of all these debates was that Mr. Putin rejected the opportunity to change the constitution. Actually, I think he has all opportunities to do so, given his recent strong positions inside Russian politics. But he decided not to change constitution in order to give him the third and the fourth term. He decided not to do that, despite there were examples all around Russia, in Belarus in the west and Central Asia in the south, leaders there decided to change constitution and prolong their term in power as presidents. But Mr. Putin decided not to do that, and Mr. Putin decided to act within the Russian legal field, within the Russian constitution. He violated no Russian laws, so that he decided to play within the rules of the game. Maybe somebody would say that the rules of the game are not perfect, but this has very little about Mr. Putin and very little about democracy.
All right, Mr. Felgenhauer, would you agree with that analysis? He's playing by the rules of the game. He didn't change the constitution, did he? But some would still argue that the whole episode of talking about the possibility of becoming prime minister shows that it's personalities that are important in Russia today, not institutions. What do you think?
Well, personalities are important. Institutions are also important. Of course, this is not a blow, of course, to Russian democracy, because there is no democracy in Russia. Russia is an authoritarian dictatorship, and Putin is the dictator. And of course, he wants to stay in power as any dictator would. The real problem is that if he becomes prime minister, this will create a lot of ambiguity in the Russian bureaucratic system, and their procedures are important, because the Russian prime minister is a rather weak figure. He doesn't have any control at all over the army and over the security services and over other very important pieces of the Russian bureaucracy.
But would all of that change? Sorry to interrupt you, Mr. Felgenhauer, but would all of that change? As some people are suggesting, if he does become prime minister, then maybe that would lead to an empowering of the prime ministership vis-à-vis the presidency.
That will require a very serious rewriting of the Russian constitution, and what's more important, it will need a very serious rearrangement of the enormous bureaucratic structures, because, you know, there's a presidential administration which basically took over from the Central Committee of the Communist Party after the Soviet Union disappeared, and say appointments of all generals, all ranks of all generals, I mean, not only in the military, in all spheres, in all secret services, in all places. They're prepared, they're signed by the president, their appointments. These ukazes, these decrees are prepared in the administration of the president, not in the government. So there will need a lot of change, and this will, even if it all goes well, if the new president will allow Putin to be a very powerful prime minister, there's need a lot of change and a lot of ambiguity in the bureaucratic system, especially in the military and security spheres. And that ambiguity in the bureaucratic system means that there's going to be dysfunction.
All right, let's bring in Mr. Hollingsworth from London. What do you think such a change would mean, let's not forget, for the other powerful element of Russian society, the oligarchs, if he does move from president to prime minister, or even just a powerful member of the parliament?
Well, I don't think much will change in terms of the relationship between the Russian government and the oligarchs, in the sense that Mr. Putin will clearly still be in a very powerful position, and if Mr. Zubkov does become president, as seems to be likely, he is a former investigator of corruption in the Kremlin, and I think the policy of investigating the oligarchs and reining in their power and repatriating the wealth that left Russia when the oligarchs exported a lot of the Russian wealth out of Russia. And I think that policy will continue. Mr. Berezovsky and a number of the ex-UKOS executives who are in exile in the United Kingdom, the extradition applications, policy of extraditing the oligarchs back to Russia to face trial will continue. So I don't think it will change the policy towards the oligarchs.
All right, Mr. Pikayev, does a transition into prime ministership by Mr. Putin, does it necessarily mean a weakening of the presidency?
Well, actually, I don't know. We need to wait and see. I disagree with my friend Pavel that Russia is authoritarian dictatorship. Well, there is no such term, authoritarian dictatorship. There is authoritarian regime or dictatorship. I would not think that Russia is a dictatorship so far, and Russian politics is not about
Would you not agree, at least, sorry to interrupt
only,
you, with those who say that he has amassed a lot of power in the presidency?
Well, what I wanted to say that it is about institution as well, and the institution of the presidency is very powerful here. Irrespectively who would be the next Russian president, the institute would be very strong, and it would be very difficult for Mr. Putin to change constitution in order to give more responsibility for a prime minister. Mr. Putin refused to change the constitution in order to provide the third term himself as a president, so that it would be very difficult for him to argue to change constitution in order to give him more power as a prime minister. So here is, so to speak, maybe a hope for Russian democracy that institutions are as they are, and irrespectively who would be new prime minister, this person would not occupy similar power as the same person when he occupied the position of a president. So that I expect that there would be some competition between institutions, and it would be very interesting thing to monitor for us, for political scientists, and maybe even for Russian citizens.
All right, we'll continue to monitor and discuss, but it is now time for a short break. When we come back, we'll take a look at how foreign countries view Putin's grip on power. Stay with us.